Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the planet. Welcome back to Creation Conversations, where we have a special broadcast for you today. We do this every so often. We have like a special topic which we focus on entirely throughout our Creation Conversations broadcast, and it's already been getting quite a lot of interest, which is excellent. As you can see, we have next to me here this book, which we were supposed to come on to last week, but we never actually did. We spent the whole time focusing on the Scripture Union book, and we also discussed stuff about Hugh Ross and stuff like that. We're going to be a little bit harsher this week for reasons that we'll explain as we go forward. But this is a book called God Made the Dinosaurs. It's brand new. It was published this year, so it's fairly new. There's probably going to be a push for get your kids a Christian perspective on dinosaurs by buying this book. And of course, here at Creation Research, we have our own kids' books based around dinosaurs. But again, more on that later. This book is published by the Faraday Institute. So as we go forward, we need to have a little bit about background information, right? Who is the Faraday Institute and what do they promote? And we're going to have a look at this book and see, is this a factual book? Is this a good book? Does it give you a full perspective? Does it even give you a biblical perspective? Because it certainly sounds like it should, right? God made the dinosaurs. Of course, you realize that fits, or that statement rather, fits with pretty much every religion on earth. So we need to delve in a little bit deeper and see what we can find. Before we do that, we're of course joined by the full team, except for our newest member, Glenn, who wasn't able to make it, but I'm sure he enjoyed being here last week, so I'm sure he'll be here in the future. But we, of course, have got John Mackay, we've got Diane Eager, we've got Craig Hawkins, and we've got Sam Jenkins. So how are we all? How are the people down under first? How are you doing, John and Diane?
We're doing well, thank you. Yes,
we've had a pretty busy time this last week, pretty much tied up with almost an academic research project,
yes,
isn't it? But we're getting to the end of that. So the weather is delightful, but heat is coming.
We did have a nice trip to Jurassic Ark.
We did.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a balance because I've been involved in some of your work as well, and I've been doing some of my own work, and it's been a busy old time for all of us. But Craig, how have you been doing down in Tasmania?
Yeah, not too bad. Good to be with everybody again today. But my wife is up on the mainland, so I'm balancing all the responsibilities at home and so forth. So that's been a challenging week, but still praising God.
No, good stuff. It's great. Sam, how are you doing? I know we've seen you quite a lot this week because we've been having some interesting discussions, which we'll talk about later. But how have you been doing?
I've been doing really well, thank you. It's good to be back again for another exciting Creation Conversation. So I'm excited for this topic because time and time again, when I was growing up, I'd have books on dinosaurs. I was obsessed with dinosaurs. I'd love them, but they always sort of spun the same sort of tale. So it'll be good to sort of really dig into this book and tear it to pieces without actually tearing it to pieces, because that would be vandalism. But yes, so that's really good. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's great stuff.
Sam, I've only got one disappointment. Where's your cat?
Oh, cat is currently asleep. So.
Oh, right.
And
wise cat.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I've noticed, Joe, you're currently called God Made the Dinosaurs. Have you decided to have a name change?
No, I haven't. I tried to. I've got, obviously, as you can see, I've got two cameras set up here next to me. I tried to change one of the video inputs, but it didn't see. I don't remember changing my name. Let me put it back and see.
I think it'll probably update both of them because you
probably update. I think that's probably what happened. But let's give it a try. It is Indiana Jones. Never mind. Okay, you can see what the title is. God Made the Dinosaurs. Never mind about that. Anyway, before we get on to God Made the Dinosaurs, let's just turn it off for a second, because we're gonna go round. We've done our little welcome, little bit of what we've been doing, but I know that John and Diane have a few things to show and tell. So let's go into that first, because the topic of tonight, obviously, we're dealing with the book God Made the Dinosaurs, right? And I've just seen that my dad is actually just hopped in to watch, and I'm afraid I need to mention this because it's got a close connection with dinosaurs. You see, when before Dad was a Christian, he was an atheist. hated God, hated everything to do with God. When he became a Christian, wonderful conversion testimony, but one of the number one questions that he had was, what do we do about the dinosaurs, right? And the church that he was going to at the time, he went and spoke to them and asked, what do we do with the dinosaurs? And the response that he got was, well, dinosaurs have big, horrible teeth. They have huge horns on their head. They love to kill things. I don't think that God would make something like that. I think that Satan created the dinosaurs. Now, that had an impact on me because for 4 years of my life, I was banned from having anything to do with dinosaurs, right? And I remember the first ever dinosaur book I got was a book called Dinosaurs by Design, which was by dear old Dwayne Gish, one of the forerunners in the creation science world. It's a very dated book now, but it was a book on dinosaurs from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective. Now, obviously, we're many years on from that now, and there's a huge amount more content out there about dinosaurs, not just from a secular perspective, because it was decided by the humanist and the secularist associations a while back that dinosaurs were the number one way of getting young people to reject scripture. So don't be surprised that Christians have also recognized this and jumped in on the bandwagon with dinosaurs as well as dinosaurs being a fabulous thing to actually explore and talk about. So creation research, we have our own books on dinosaurs. We have our own kids' books, a whole series on them, right? In fact, I think there's some more being published soon, John. But we also have organizations like the Faraday Institute who are starting to put stuff out about dinosaurs as well. So dinosaurs is our overarching theme this evening, but specifically looking at this book. So John and Diane, why don't you give us your little section today about Jurassic Ark and about some of the dinosaur-y things that you've got going on over there?
Well, perhaps we better first of all tell you what we've been doing in this last week, so you'll get the context. Diane, you mentioned we've been to Jurassic Ark.
Yes, we have.
And
yes.
You're going to be talking about that
yes.
soon to show dinosaurs, what we have up there. But we actually did a very interesting project. And Joe, I know you love the old English program Time Team. And we were watching a program last week, my wife and I and Diane down in the lounge room having a Sunday afternoon break, put on the YouTube, caught up with some programs. And they did one program on those fossil footprints up the Bristol Channel. And halfway through, they were stuck in the mud, quite literally, right? And then they said, well, let's sieve the mud and see if we can find anything in it that we wouldn't notice. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So what did we do last Monday, Diane?
Well, we spent a fair bit of time sieving our sort of pebble bed that we have at Jurassic Ark. Part of the deposit there is this bed of sand and pebbles, and so we dug some of that up and we sieved it.
We did indeed. Standing over a wheelbarrow sieving like that is a good recipe for a sore back and a desire for a bed. But out of that, we not only found lumps of volcanic ash, we not only found, mostly almost just above microscopic grains. And in that, we found some, well, what were the three things we found, Diane?
Well, we found three objects that look like seeds. So they're fossilized, they're hard, and they have texture and shape just like seeds. So we think we may have found some fossil seeds.
We certainly do. They're shaped like flattened citrus seeds, and they're textured on the outside, which is just not a grain of clay or anything like that. So we've now got another research project to follow up, haven't we? So anyone who wants to donate the money for a high-powered microscope for creation research, come on. But there's one other thing we've been doing in this last week, which is related to our program tonight, and that is every week we have Karen come in, and Karen is our museum cataloguing lady. It's her job to take just some of the 30,000 fossils that we actually have collected over the years, categorize them, put them on the computer. So pray for her. She has to put up with people like me who said, why did you put this one there when it's actually belonging over here? But some of the things Karen's been looking at deal with our dinosaur topic. You see, we do up these in boxes, particularly for display in schools. So that's a genuine dinosaur footprint. And yes, it is Jurassic. And yes, it was formed in the mud, just like the footprints, the human footprints up the Bristol Channel. So perhaps we should break up some of that hardened mud and sieve it too. Do you think that'd be a good idea? We've got a few specimens like that. So we make it our job not just to research the books. In fact, one of the things that I'd encourage any of you young creationists out there, and I've given this advice to quite a few people, starting with people like Vance Nelson, get out and do your own research. Don't just read the books. That's the easy way to do it. Get out there and do it the genuine way. Dig up your fossils, collect. It's worth the effort, and you may find the first Jurassic orange tree or whatever in that piece of rock that you dig up. But of course, one of the other things, and we've spoken about this, we have some really heavy specimens. Isn't that beautiful? We've been cutting and slicing and getting polished many of our Jurassic Ark trees. There's a group that potentially is interested in the dendrochronology, the time of them. So yes, we love to do real research, and yes, it does cost us quite a fortune to send them to Australia's best fossil cutters and polishers, because some of our Jurassic Ark trees are full of iron. That is very hard to actually polish. Not hard in terms of hardness, like diamond scale, etc., but hard to actually get a polish onto it so you can clearly see. But can you see anything interesting about this tree? You see, most people look, yep, I'm looking now too. Most people look, but they can't see, because most people never notice that many of the trees are actually damaged on one side and not on the other. See how the rings go round the bottom and they're even, but up the top, there's several big chunks that are missing. And one of the things that characterizes so many of the fossil trees, yes, that's a Jurassic piece of tree. One of the things that characterize many of the trees is damage that is most likely volcanic. It's been a blast that's come from one side. I personally experienced this because I've been to Mount St. Helens so many times, and many of the trees, you can tell they've been in a volcanic eruption, because 8 out of 10 are damaged on one side. Yes, 2 out of 10 will have the wind swirling around and blowing the rocks back in the other way. That does happen in volcanic turbulence. But you get an overall idea. This is beautifully preserved. It was buried quickly, but it was buried damaged. The damage was not formed by it rolling along, and when it was exposed out and tumbled in a stream, the damage was there before the tree was petrified, and the damage has been preserved. So that's some of the stuff we've been doing in ministry, hasn't it? Yes, but of course, Diane, you've taken the advantage of joining me the other night when we did a program for geologists on Jurassic Ark. So you better tell them some of the things that have come up, because we've had some interesting discoveries this week, not just about the trees, but about dinosaurs, correct? Okay, yes, take it away, Diane.
Yes, we're quite keen on dinosaurs at Jurassic Ark, and if I can get the PowerPoint to go, if I can find the...
You're up on the screen at our end.
Up on the screen now. I can't see the mouse because of that light.
There we are. It's up there. You got to bring it down here. Be nice if we had a touch screen on our main computer. Something's gone.
We're working.
Okay, no, it's not actually going down. I'm going to have to shift it for you. Okay.
It just changed.
Yes, I know, but it's gone too far ahead. It's just.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't have our mouses.
Just try using your
There we are. We're on target now.
Yes.
That one. No, oh, you want us to start again? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yes, at Jurassic Ark, we, as we said, we're now able to have more groups come along, and we are getting more groups, so that's always encouraging. Homeschool groups, church groups, anyone who wants to come along. And yes, here are the guys who have helped maintain the site through all of the time when we couldn't have visitors and set it up in the first place, and are now keeping it going. And in the middle there is Daryl, who looks after it, who's the regular curator who works on the site all the time, and a couple of our volunteer helpers who have helped us set up some of the experiments and helped with the excavations and also the machinery and all of the other things that's needed to keep it going. And of course, they're standing around one of our most popular items there is one of our dinosaurs. And yes, people love dinosaurs. But we need to tell people the truth about dinosaurs, because as the Apostle Paul warned young Timothy, and through him, the whole church, of course, is that we need to beware of false science. And we're going to look at a bit about that. How can we discern false science? Because it is a problem. It will lead you astray from the faith. And I've heard many testimonies of people who have departed from the faith, not just because of dinosaurs, but because of the whole approach to fossils and rocks and the earth in general, but and evolutionary ideas in general. So how do we cope with that? Well, we tell people the truth. And so that's why we like people to come to Jurassic Ark. And yes, when they arrive, they will see dinosaurs. We have Triceratops there near the entrance. And of course, we need to remind people that the term Jurassic has nothing to do with dinosaurs. It was originally named by someone who did believe the Bible, and it's to do with the rocks in the Jura Mountains. And we have discussed that history in the past, but everyone thinks, yes, Jurassic dinosaurs. No, they should know their history, and that's one of the things that we try to do, is fill in those gaps in people's knowledge. And as you go into the park, yes, we have big dinosaurs and we have small dinosaurs. And it's important to remember that dinosaurs, we think of them as being really huge, but they started out small in their lives, because we know that, because we have dinosaur eggs, so we know how big they were when they were born. So they had to live part of their lives as being quite small when they were juveniles. So Noah would have had no problem with them fitting on the ark if he was taking juveniles. And even the big fierce ones like T-Rex would have started out life and tiptoed around the flowers and smelt them, and probably ate some of them as well, because we're told that all animals were vegetarian in the first place. However big they are or however small they are, the kids really love them. So it is important that we tell them the truth about dinosaurs. And we have some Australian dinosaurs as well. This is an Australian specimen, and that's down in our in amongst our living fossil garden. And even though these are now extinct, they're not really living fossils, but in the fossil record, they appear fully formed. We can classify them, give them names, and then they disappear. They die out. There's no evidence that they ever changed from one kind into another, from one kind of dinosaur into another, let alone into another kind of creature like a bird. And we'll take up that a little bit later on. Now, as well as these models, you can come and experience virtual dinosaurs. We have a program run by an app called Dream AR, where you can scan a picture that we have set up there, and there will pop up a dinosaur in your phone camera. This is quite clever. So you can have your picture taken with a dinosaur, and you can pose for that and make it as dramatic as you like. And you can have a lot of fun with that. You can have pterosaurs flying through the skies. Here they are, flying through the skies. Pterosaurs look quite realistic, don't they? And in the Dream AR app, these do actually move. These are just still pictures from them. So it's quite fun to stand with your phone camera and sort of scan around the sky and have a pterosaur flapping its wings flying over the park. Now, another evidence for dinosaurs, of course, in many parts of the world are footprints. And here is a group from one of our open days looking at some footprints. Now, these are not the original fossils. This is actually a trackway of dinosaurs that we made, but it is based on a real trackway out in Winton in Queensland. And it's interesting, after we made this, we showed pictures of it to the Australian Dinosaur Museum, and they were really impressed. In fact, they were so impressed, they wanted to know how we made it. We haven't told them, it's a trade secret. But they really were impressed. Now, the standard story about these is that this is a big, fierce predator who was chasing some smaller dinosaurs for dinner. However, back in 2011, a Professor Salisbury did a study of these, and you can identify dinosaurs from their footprints. If you've got a whole lot of them, you can look at their stride length, you can study the individual structure in a fair bit of detail, and you can identify what major kind of dinosaur that made these. And Professor Salisbury back in 2011 said no, the big one was not a big, fierce meat-eating predator chasing his lunch. This was actually, these are the footprints of a vegetarian dinosaur. And this was published in the literature. So the people at Winton actually did know about this, but they still persist with the tourist story because, well, it doesn't make a good story. This is one big vegetarian and a few other smaller vegetarians. Everyone likes a good story of a big fierce predator chasing a few smaller dinosaurs, and so they persist with that, even though they know that it's been shown that this is by a professor and published in the professional literature that this was actually, the big one was actually a vegetarian. Now, interestingly, a new study came out this week that confirmed that in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface. So that's a prominent British journalist. They used artificial intelligence. You'd enjoy this, Sam. They used artificial intelligence to study dinosaur tracks. And so they trained this artificial intelligence program or app or whatever you call it to recognize different dinosaur tracks. And so they got them, and footprints. They got this program to look at all of these. And then they got it to look at these this particular trackway. It's a very famous one. It's known all over the world. And the AI, the artificial intelligence, confirmed that this was a large vegetarian dinosaur. So interesting when we get on to our topic of beware of false science. But anyway, back to Jurassic Ark. We have this cast. This is a well-known cast. I've seen a cast of this same dinosaur at the Natural History Museum. And the reason we have it there is because it shows a typical pose of dinosaurs when they are actually found as fossils. Now, we see them in museums all nicely set up with their long necks projecting in front and dragging their tails behind. But when they are dug up, a lot of them are actually found in this particular pose. It's got a name, epistotonic death pose, but don't worry about that. This head back, tail back pose is very distinctive, and lots of dinosaurs are found with this pose, and it's well known. And interesting research has shown that this is the sort of thing that happens in an animal that's drowning. You get a spasm of the muscles in the back as it sort of literally takes its last gasp. And in a long-necked creature with a long flexible neck and a long flexible tail, that sort of spasm is going to pull the head back, pull the tail back, and you get this particular death pose. But it doesn't last long, because when the animal dies, of course, the muscles relax. And so that will fall apart, that pose. So the animal is drowning, and it also has to be very, very quickly. So we have a typical drowned dinosaur. It's mounted on one of our murals, and but it's not a rarity. It's just a particularly nice example, this one. Now we also have another drowned dinosaur. This is a Chinese dinosaur named Guanlong Wukai, which literally means crested dragon of 5 colors. Now the 5 colors refers to the rocks it was found in. The genus name crested dragon is interesting. The Chinese have found a lot of dinosaurs recently, and they give them names of something long. So Mi Long, Guan Long, and long in Chinese means dragon. The Chinese know a dragon when they see them, and as far as they're concerned, these are dragon bones. Now, the other interesting thing about this one is that it's also drowned. It's drowned by and preserved by a process that we do observe in living things or things that are alive and die today. A couple of young visitors to Jurassic Ark identified this, didn't they, John?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, one young lad said, "Oh, I know how this happened. My dad keeps cows, and one of our cows drowned in the flood." Now, when an animal dies, particularly when a ruminant dies, of course, it has this great fermentation vat inside it, and of course that all swells up with gas, and eventually it will burst. However, cows, of course, are covered with the thick hide, with basically like a great big leather bag. So even though you may have an explosion inside, the bones will actually stay together because they're still contained within the skin, but they are separated out and messed up. And that's what's happened here. This dinosaur has drowned, and its insides have been blown apart, but its skin has been intact enough to keep them together. And so you have this collection of bones. So another drowned dinosaur. Now, another recent report in the scientific news that we found to do with dinosaurs relates to these two things we've just looked at, that death pose and the Chinese names. So recently reported on the 19th of November was this new Chinese dinosaur. And this was the name of their paper, Intestinal Preservation in a Bird-like Dinosaur Supports Conservatism in Digestive Canal Evolution Among Theropods. So they found this dinosaur. It had this great big blob of preserved tissue inside it, which they think is part of its intestines that's been preserved. Now, that's what they concentrated on in their paper. But because it was a species which they hadn't seen before, they have the right to give it a name. And so this is what they called it, Dualong Wangi. And if you name a dinosaur in the literature, right, you have to explain where your genus and species name came from. And so sure enough, here we are. The genus name is derived from the Dua Nation, which is an ethnic minority that live in Inner Mongolia in China. So it's named after a place in China. And they explain this quite explicitly, the Chinese, and that's the Chinese, what do they call them, pictogram or yes, for long. And that literally means dragon. That's what they wrote. So they are admitting, we have found another Chinese dragon. And here is their photo of their dinosaur, and notice the pose. Notice the head back and tail back pose. Right.
By the way, Don, for those who can't figure it out, the head is at the top,
yes,
the arms are on the left-hand side, the feet are at the bottom, and the recurved tail coming out to the right-hand side.
Yes. Yes. So now they don't make a big thing about that in the in the paper, because they're more interested in, well, giving it a name, and also the sort of blob of tissue inside it, which they think is preserved intestines. But again, wherever you get a whole skeleton or almost a whole skeleton, you have that distinctive dinosaur, that distinctive death pose, just like the one that we have at Jurassic Ark. And now the other interesting thing is they refer to feathers. Now they just gloss over this a bit, but if you read the captions to their illustrations, they say, oh, well, it's got feathers. Can anyone see any feathers? You see any feathers?
Can't see any, no.
I'll show you where the feathers are supposed to be on its back. So if you look, and that inset in the upper right-hand corner there, that's meant to be a close-up of the feathers. Are you impressed?
Well, I've got fossil feathers in my collection. You've seen them, Diane, and they don't look a
Yes,
thing
I
like
have
that.
actually. I took some photos of them, and they look nothing like this. In fact, let's have a closer look at this. Is their photo, and can you see any feathers? Now, this is important because this is the extent of feathers that you have reported. Whenever you see feathered dinosaur, no, they don't find any feathers. What they find are these sort of filamentous structures. Sometimes they do project out from the skin. They also claim there are feathers around the tail, which are small and project backwards. But yes, if you look very closely at it, there might be a few fine filaments. But that's about as good as it gets in terms of dinosaur feathers actually attached to dinosaurs. When they find fully formed feathers, they are attached to a creature that's not a dinosaur, or they just feathers on their own. And the only reason they're called dinosaur feathers is because they're found in a rock formation, or as we've seen in our own collection, in a piece of amber that is already dated as being the dinosaur age. There's no evidence actually connecting them to dinosaurs. Now, we're not just showing you this to pour scorn on those people who found this dinosaur and processed it and classified it. It is important that we remind people that there are plenty of opinions and theories that disagree with the Bible about creation and about the flood, but the facts never do. The facts are that dinosaurs appear in their own kinds and they don't change into other kind of dinosaurs, and there's no evidence that they change into birds either. They multiplied after their kind for as long as they lived on the earth. That's creation as described in Genesis. And then we have the evidence all over the world of drowned dinosaurs, and some of them are a lot bigger than this one. This one was only 1.5 meters long if you sort of stretched it out longer, and they have that distinctive death pose. So we have evidence of catastrophic and sudden burial. So there's plenty of evidence that actually fits the flood or fits the Bible. The facts don't disagree with the Bible, the facts support it. And that's because the real history of the world, of course, is not from nothingness to nature to human beings with a constant ascent from just nothingness to complexity. In fact, the history of the world is created perfection, right? Fully formed things in a perfect world. But since then, the world has gone downhill. So we find lots of evidence of things going downhill, things degenerating, things dying out, things going wrong. That's the real history of the world. And you will understand anything, whether it be dinosaurs, fossils, living things, if you look at it from this biblical point of view, from this biblical worldview. Now, as we say, kids really love dinosaurs, so we have this wonderful book, What Happened to the Dinosaurs, because we need to know. And so this is a fun book. It features John Mackay and his 2 grandchildren who go out to dig dinosaurs, and they find all sorts of interesting evidence. And of course, we had to feature Jurassic Ark in it, of course. And this is also linked up to that Dream AR app that we have. You can use this book. Notice the little symbol down there of a dinosaur footprint. You can use that in the book to get extra information about dinosaurs and some good fun things. And so we start out at Jurassic Ark, and if we just click on this, you can see what happens with the little Dream AR app.
Welcome to Jurassic Ark. Please keep your seatbelt on at all times in a moving vehicle, and do not feed the fossils.
Okay, there you are, going past our first dinosaur there, the very, very popular one. And Yeah. So do come and visit us at Jurassic Ark if you can. We're open for visitors, and we want lots. We had a wonderful open day this year. It was really good. We will have another one this year, but in the meantime, bring your group, whatever sort of group it is. Bring your enemies as well as your friends. It's amazing the number of skeptics we've had come to Jurassic Ark and actually see the evidence for themselves and gone away with things to think about, and some of them have been impacted on it and drawn to the Lord. So do come along. If you can't, well, you can find out about dinosaurs from our various sources, starting with our main website, creationresearch.net, but also our fact file and our Ask site. And if we can come back to us on the main screen, thanks.
Before we dive into the main thing tonight, can I just pull up something to show you guys and comment on based off of what Diane has just said? Let me get it up. Right, there we go. Can you all see that?
Yeah,
I certainly can.
So this is a cast of some dinosaur footprints in the Natural History Museum in London. Okay, these are still there. They've been in the Natural History Museum for a long while. They're a cast. They're not an original, as are most of the fossils that are on display in the Natural History Museum in London. They're all casts, or the majority of them anyway, and this is no exception. There is where it's from. Presented by Queensland Museum in 1988. Now, this is where you were talking about, Diane, the Winton, the ones that you've replicated at Jurassic Ark, right? Mm-hmm. So this is, when did you say that paper was written, saying that they're both herbivores?
2011 is the first one, and then the recent one is just last week.
Just last week, yeah. So 2011, at least 12 years we've known, 10, 11 years we've known about these being herbivores, right? This is still in the Natural History Museum. It was still there just the other day because we had some supporters go and visit, and I asked them to check. These are some of the pictures, right? There's your ages, there's where it's from. Trackways give us vital information about how they moved. At Lark Quarry in Australia, there's trackway evidence of dinosaur stampede when 160 small dinosaurs were ambushed by a large meat eater while drinking at a water hole. This cast of part of the Lark Quarry trackway shows the large meat eater's footprints covered by the prints of smaller dinosaurs stampeding in the opposite direction. So even now, having known about this for at least 10 years and having had brand new stuff, I wonder how much longer this is going to be there, because at the end of the day, this is promoting nothing more than a good story. It has no basis in any kind of reality at all, really.
Yes, I've seen that at the Natural History Museum as well.
Joe,
yes.
If I can add another commendation, particularly any of you out there who are young creationists who are still got plenty of energy and effort. As I mature past middle age, one of the things I found very beneficial is to not just read the books, as I said right at the start, but to get out there and do your own digging, and more importantly, go and talk to these guys about what they actually know. So yes, I did go to the Sydney Naturalist Museum when I discovered that they'd found a fossil possum-like creature buried with a whale at your famous fossil place, Craig, down there in Tasmania. And as I spoke to Dr. Alex Ritchie, he was adamant I would not be allowed in to actually see the specimens. So you'll have to develop a sort of a rhinoceros-like skin, because there is a definite agenda to not let creationists have access to the data. Likewise, when I discovered Dr. Bassinger, the guy associated with the forest that had just been found up in the Arctic, I went straight up there into Canada. Yes, my air mile points don't add up to the cost of this at all, but if you want to support what we do, you can see where the costs are, going to the university and going to his office and saying, can I have some specimens of your wood? His answer, no way. Now, I'd already spoken to his lab assistant and I knew he had tons of it and I'd personally seen it. But being polite, which Aussies are, of course, as you will all know by now, I asked him for permission to actually get a specimen, and he refused. Of course, praise the Lord, I did have other options. One of my friends was in the Canadian, the aerial survey people who look for illegal immigrants and smugglers and people wrongly using their offshore islands. And I managed to get myself some specimens anyway. But what's even more important is they had plenty of coal there, and that's what Bassinger was worried about, because he told me face to face, I know what you would do with the evidence for the coal that's there. And he was quite right. We are there to expose error. Likewise with Winton, which is the point I'm making. I've been out there even before it was famous. It was just an old quarry. And so we actually have specimens from old collectors who were there before it was a national property or anything like that. And it's really great to have them. Okay, but going beyond, I went out there and I asked the curator. I said, have you seen Dr. Salisbury's paper? Oh, yes. I said, you realize it says these footprints are belonging to a vegetarian? He said, yes. I said, well, but you still keep telling people about the carnivore story. He said, no one would come if we tell about a big vegetarian and little vegetarians all running at the same time from something that's obviously pursuing them, because there are plenty of log trackways that have been dragged through the mud. And you can imagine a fossil flood, a fossil log jam following these dinosaurs. I'd run too, and I'm getting to be a dinosaur. And so when you have a look at this, you young ones out there particularly, get out there and talk to them. You will need a skin like a rhinoceros, I'm afraid, but it's the one way to get actual specific information that you won't get in the printed literature. And great stuff with that AI paper that just came out. We try to be as up to date, and you can thank Diane particularly and Joe for keeping us as up to date as possible, and Craig down there, because he can go and check Fossil Bluff. And now they've got a little sign there, don't they, Craig, about the fossil whale and that. You were just there a few weeks ago, correct?
Yeah, it's a beautiful site. Yeah, I've reported
and they admit it, that it's actually there, the whale and the possum-like creature?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's land and sea creatures dumped together. Again, looks more like a flood than anything else. Okay, Joe, where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, well, we've got obviously the main bulk tonight is going to be on God Made the Dinosaurs, which we're going to focus the rest of the time, and we're going to try and get through the whole book. But before we do that, Sam, do we have some thank yous and maybe a couple of questions? Let's try and keep it to just 2, though, because we do want to try and get through all of this.
That's fine. We do have some thank yous to do. We've got a super chat from good friend George Bond, 20 Aussie Buckaroos after a short absence. Doki is back. Yeah, baby. Yep. And he certainly is, because he's coming straight after that with 2 US Buckaroos, a pair character doing a shaka sign with his hand saying cool.
What's a shaka sign?
Is that one?
Is that thing, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's... Cool. I don't know what that is.
Oh, that's what that is. I thought it might have been Winston Churchill who lost some fingers.
And he's also done a super sticker for 99 US Centaroos. I don't have a word for sentence. Smiling face with sunglasses. Thank you so much, guys. Got a quick one here from George. More of a jokey question. Was the town of Mackay named after the famous Mackay? Town of Mackay named after the famous Mackay name? Maybe John is too modest.
Okay, Mackays are famous anyway. The oldest John Mackay I can find is from the 9th century, when he led an expedition to get back our family castle. So we are not only long-term lasters, we like to climb cliffs and rescue castles and all those sort of famous things. But perhaps it's a good lead up to being bold enough to go into the Sydney Museum and ask the chief professor face to face. You need that sort of thing. But back to the more local question, yes, there are several lots of Mackays who have arrived in Australia. Basically, the same big family, but 2 almost from different locations. One went to the south of New South Wales. The other has sort of come into the Queensland area, which is me. And we have a couple of relatives stuck down there in the southern part of Australia in Victoria. There's an election coming down there, by the way, so you'd better pray for them, because they've currently got a fairly left-wing, non-Christian, anti-Christian government in power, who make it very difficult for many of the Christian schools and things like that. That's coming up pretty soon. As to the town of Mackay, the Mackays have been famous in the sugarcane industry. They've been famous in moving from place to place. And so, yes, it is named after a Mackay, a long-term relative, and it's a John Mackay too, so who set up the local sugar industry here and also moved to other places. So there is an offbeat relationship there. So can't take direct claim for it, but I'm happy with the name being stuck like that.
Awesome sauce. And we have, see, you chatsters, you outdo yourselves. We've got some more thanks to give. Just in that short time we've been speaking to Doki Doki coming in with another 99 Centaroos. I think it's going to have to be Centaroos now. Smiling face with sunglasses. We've got super sticker for 2.99 Aussie Buckaroos from Jim. An orange suitcase with travel stickers.
Good, he's coming to Jurassic Ark. That's really good.
Either that or I need a holiday. And Doki Doki coming in again with 1.99 US Buckaroos, a red hand pointing up. There you go. I don't have a red hand. I mean, maybe if I like clap my hands really vigorously to make it red and then point up, that might work. But you have to do with a pink hand pointing up, unfortunately. One more question. Here we go. This one is from Doki. Do you know about the Granby Stone Idol? Do you think the museum lost it on purpose?
I cannot plead any information about that one, but my one observation on some of these type claims, and it's not specifically about this one, when I first got involved in this sort of work, there were lots of claims about pots found with food in them or objects that were buried in the coal and things like that. But being someone who pursues things as far as I can, you'd actually get in touch where the reference museum was, but it had been burnt down, right? So many of these claims disappear into really nothingness. I don't know about this one in particularly, but we have quite a few areas in Australia that are almost in the same category. So one of our friends has been a lecturer at university and came across a whole series of hieroglyphs on the cliffs outside of really South Sydney, really. Sorry, I think it's North Sydney. Yeah. And when he pursued this, he found that it was a professor who'd actually found these first, and they are really well done. I've been to see them myself. But once you get past this professor and say, well, how did he find them? What was his expertise? Yes, he did have a fair bit of background in Phoenician, wasn't it? Phoenician hieroglyphics. But then you find the counterclaim, well, he not only had enough expertise to recognize them, he had enough expertise to carve them too. So you actually don't know. So sorry about the Granby Stone Idol. I hope one of us knows a bit more, or we can follow it up. Joe, you ever heard of this one?
I've heard of it, but I don't know very much about it. If my memory serves me well, it was a carved stone found in the States, which purportedly had like Chinese writing or something like that on it, some kind of ancient writing on it. But I don't know an enormous amount about it, I'm afraid. We'll have to look it up.
Yeah. Can I also recommend that when people ask questions like this, if you look at that statement, do you think the museum lost it on purpose? You can be objective about whether they do or don't have it. That will be factual. When you say, do you think, you're asking for my opinion, and I don't have one, or I might have one. Either way, that's all it would count for. And then you're asking a really tough one, because having dealt with courts and lawyers, did they lose it on purpose? Now, the hardest part of any legal case is establishing a motive, establishing that they actually had a purpose in losing it. And it almost inevitably, you can't achieve that, because that's sort of within within the body, up in the brain, and you can't investigate that, at least not yet. Perhaps we'll get an AI lawyer who'll be able to tear your brain apart and, you know, put a special ray in there. There's the memory. He did it on purpose. But until then, we can't do that. So when you phrase those questions, it's a do you know or don't you know? Does it have it? And have you found any evidence it was lost on purpose? The questions matter.
All right. Well, I think we should dive straight into the topic of this evening then. You can see our book up there, God Made the Dinosaurs. That's our topic of conversation this evening, the main one anyway. Before we dive in, as I mentioned earlier, this is backed by the Faraday Institute. Now, Diane, very briefly, I know we've written about the Faraday Institute before. Can you give us a very brief background to the Faraday Institute? Because I know you've had dealings with them and in your church, and I've had personal dealings with one of the main people from the Faraday Institute, and we even wrote an article together about it. So give us a quick rundown.
Yes, the Faraday. Well, if the name Faraday refers to Michael Faraday, who is a well-known British scientist. Sadly, I don't think he would actually want to own this institute, because he was a Bible-believing Christian who spent a lot of his time actually developing Sunday school teaching programs to teach people the truth about the Bible. But he also loved science for the general public. He used to give lectures on science, which were very popular. Now, this is the 19th century, the Victorian era in Britain, when people were interested in the natural world. And so these lectures by Faraday were very popular. And he wanted to show people the real world, the God of the real world. Now, the Faraday Institute is a more modern institute of Christians or people who claim to know Christ, who are also scientists. And of course, Faraday, being a venerated scientist in Britain, they have picked up his name and used it. Personally, I think they've used it in vain. But anyway, that's their choice of name. And they want to promote science and the Bible, but sadly, they want to promote evolution. They are a theistic evolutionist. They believe that God used evolution, and therefore what they are promoting is not God created according to the plain meaning of Genesis, or God sent the flood according to the main meaning of Genesis. They want to combine evolution with the Bible. And as Joseph mentioned, one of their main proponents, or one of their main speakers, is a man named Dennis Alexander, who has been to Australia and spoken in lots of churches there, promoting evolution. And we have written about him, but Joseph, you've actually met him. I haven't. So perhaps you can tell us about that.
Well, I say, yeah, it was an interesting meeting, an interesting conversation. But essentially, the end result of that was him essentially claiming that the creationists are ignorant of what the Bible and science has to say, and most of them are young. So there you are, John and Diane. You can both be, and all of us here, in fact. He basically said most of them are young because, generally speaking, the creationists tend to be ignorant of the Bible and science has to say. He also referred to us as religious extremists, which is an interesting labeling, but there we go. Yes, in fact, actually, if you have a look at the video description on YouTube, you can see there's about 3 links there. All of them have links to articles and stuff that we've done on the Faraday Institute on
Are you referring to Diane and yours article?
Yeah, Beware of Alexander. Yeah,
okay,
there's actually,
Stan, you better put a link up to that.
Yeah, there it is. It's in the the links are already all up in the description of the video, so it's literally just below the video that they're watching. Yeah, it's all there, and you'll see that I think I put up 3 links, I believe. I'm just getting it up. Whoops, go away. There we go. Yes, I've put up 3 links there. So the first one is Beware of Alexander, Personal Experience from Creation Research, which is what Diane and I did. There's another one called Beware of Alexander, which was done in 2008 when he published his book, Creation or Evolution, Do We Have to Choose? And the third link is actually to our Jesus Made the Dinosaurs program, which is relevant to do with this book as well. Okay, but let's dive straight into it, okay, folks? So as always, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the book. Anybody who wants to pitch in and give their thoughts, just go for it. As we start to sort of work through it, we'll sort of be seeing what our thoughts are. So the first thing that obviously we're looking at, and the question that we're asking is, it says here, God made the dinosaurs. And really the question that we need to be asking is, which God are they actually talking about? And that is an important point because, John, give us a very brief theological rundown. This word God here, it's not a name.
Okay, here's the immediate issue you find in Western countries: Muslims claiming the Islamic God is the same as the Christian God. Now, that is the first place you need to say, well, is that true? What about a Christadelphian or a Mormon who says their God is the same as the Christian God? How would you decide that? Well, the interesting thing, the word God is common to many religions. The concept of God as a supreme being is common to even the Masonic Lodge, right? But are they talking about the Christian God? If you read your Bible, a little bit of information is always helpful. In the beginning, God, or if you like it in Hebrew, Beresheth bara Elohim. But one of the things you discover, and I've confirmed this with many Bible teachers and many Bible translators, the word translated God, Elohim, is not a name. It's a description. The I am tells you it's plural. I mean, as in Nephilim or Mayim or some of those other Hebrew words, the waters above or the giants were in the land. This is a plural term. There's at least 2 parts to this God. And later on, you discover there's 3. The God of Genesis is the all-powerful being, but it's not named in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. You don't find him given a name until Genesis chapter 2. So anyone who says, oh my God, yep, that's a common usage of the word God. You need to ask them, well, who is your supreme being? Who is the one who you put over all? Because mostly they just have, that's a throwaway line. They don't mean anybody by that. They're not even talking about themselves at the most. Oh my God, God made the dinosaurs. You have to ask Mr. Faraday's Institute. Sorry to misuse the name Faraday because I know what answer he would have given to that. The God in the Old Testament who made everything is the Jesus in the New Testament, where it is revealed all things were made by Christ and all things were made for Christ, said over and over again. So Genesis chapter 1 is about Jesus Christ, not about Allah, not about the Mormon God, not about the oh my God at all. This is a specific being by the name, later on you learn, Jehovah, or actually Jesus Christ, or if you like the combination, the Yahweh in the Old Testament, who actually comes to earth and is given the name Jesus.
Okay, so that's our first important concept, and you notice that it promises to be full of fantastic illustrations and facts. Well, you can just see from the front cover, it's full of fantastic illustrations. But what about fantastic facts? Of course, you have to be careful with your words because fantastic comes from the root word fantasy. So you do have to be careful about the fantasy facts that are going to be presented in this book. So let's start digging through. First ever page, not even really a page, just the first sort of inside cover. You can see immediately that we have got a timeline of history from the Permian up here in the Paleozoic through the Triassic, mid-Triassic, late Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, all of this, right? And of course, if you are taking a secular evolutionary point of view, you're viewing these as time zones, periods, epochs in Earth's history. John, geological perspective, we're dealing with not so much time zones here, but the original concept was rock layers, rock types.
That's correct. And as we've run several programs on how did the layers get there, that by the time you get to Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin and now the Faraday Institute, these layers are regarded as reading the pages of a book, one on top of the other, in which the fossils in the bottom layer were living and dying over vast amounts of time, and they were eventually replaced by evolving into other groups, until finally they evolved off the planet. They become extinct, usually by meteorite bombardment or some sort of theory like that. So these layers no longer represent layers of actual rocks. They represent a reconstruction. In fact, it's what I call the first reconstructionist history on the planet, where they took facts that now become, as Joseph rightly pointed out, fantasy that many Christians sadly perceive and then act on as if they were facts. That's probably enough for the moment, Joe. They can see our programs on the strata machine and the construction of layers.
Absolutely, yeah.
And refer them to that.
I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that the minute we're not even on the first official page, right? We're just on the inside hardcover, and we have no doubt as to the kind of concepts that are going to be pushed in this book, right? And I think it's really important to understand that the whole idea of, I mean, we have labels of millions of years, or 174 to 164 million years, right there. The whole concept of deep time, the whole concept of millions of years in evolution is an inherently pagan concept, which was brought into the modern scientific world by Charles Lyell predominantly, and some others, but predominantly Charles Lyell, who had a specifically anti-God agenda, and he admitted this openly in his letters, right? He wanted free science from Moses. So already we are into a anti-God concept being pushed in a kid's book on dinosaurs. Now, something that we do need to keep a little lookout for as we go through this, we need to look for specific references to heresy, specific references to stuff which is ultimately anti-biblical at its core. Now, again, we're not even on the first page yet, and let's see if we can see what this little comment here says. Let's bring it a little bit closer. It says there, God's dinosaurs first roamed the earth more than 240 million years ago. The clever evolutionary process that God uses to create each new living thing means there's been loads of different types of dinosaurs since then. Instantly, we are dealing with something which is other than what Scripture records. Just straight away, we're talking about a clever evolutionary process that God uses to create. I mean, John, from my understanding, and I know you've debated, maybe Diane would like to comment on this as well, but I know when it comes to design, one of the comments that have been made is an evolution is something that can happen by itself. A creation is something that can't. So instantly, we've got a clash of terms with God using evolution to create. You're dealing with two different concepts here.
Well, there's a couple of things I'll say, and while I'm saying it, you can find where they've got Titanosaur on that diagram, because we know a lot about Titanosaur out here. It's at one of our Aussie dinosaurs. But when they start saying God used evolution, the first day of Queensland University, it became evident that our senior professor was a theologian who believed God used millions of years of evolution. Now, I hadn't been a Christian very long. This was all shocking surprise to me, because as I read the Bible, it didn't say that. I'd been an evolutionist, and the Bible was so different, it didn't even match. So the first point you can make is, okay, Faraday Institute, where do you get this from? Because it isn't from the Bible. I read and reread Genesis, and I read and reread everything my professor said and wrote, and I could not match the two up. Now that to me is my first test about where is this stuff coming from. It is not coming from a historical, biblical, inherent process at all. The second thing is that when you actually go and dig up dinosaurs, and I'll get Diane to comment after mine more about Faraday's take on theistic evolution. Joe, did you find where Titanosaur is in that diagram?
There's a few Titanosaurs, because they're sort of more of a general group. You've got these kind of creatures here. You see the big, tall, long-necked ones? Yep. There's another one up here as well. General sort of long-necked grouping of dinosaurs, but I think you've got Titanosaurs.
Let me ask you about these bones here.
Let's bring you up there. Screen so we can see you. There we go.
There we are. Now, what sort of creature? We took these and we actually, wrong case. Well, I get the big case there. We like to go to schools and to universities and actually take evidence to show them, right? Now, I sent you some high definition pictures of these, and you proceeded to take them to a world expert, correct?
We did, yep.
Okay, what was his name and what did he say?
We took them to sent them to a guy called Dean Lomax, Dr. Dean Lomax, who I've been acquainted with in the past, and he basically was able to give us two different dinosaur groupings types that we are looking at here. Interestingly enough, both of these buried together. So one of them was the large titanosaur caudal vertebrae, so that's a tailbone. Tail vertebrae, and the other one was from one of the large marine creatures, big sort of like often called swimming dinosaurs, Mosasaurus type of creature. So the fact that you've got both of these buried together is quite interesting straight off the bat.
Now, he's actually the world expert on bone identification, and he works for who?
Particularly in the marine stuff, yes, he's very, very, very good at that. He's associated with the University of Manchester, amongst a few others. He's most recently been known for the giant ichthyosaur that was found in Rutland, the largest one ever found. So he's actually led the team that excavated that. So very well known.
Now, again, I want to recommend that if you want to talk about stuff like this, you want to have a biblical opinion, then the Bible says, watch out for false science. And this is what the Faraday Institute is guilty of. They are telling you that these are facts, and they don't have a belief in Noah's flood as a global thing like that. And yet I found these bones, collected them, carried them back myself. I got bags of them, right? And while we photographed all of them, we haven't got around to analysing any more than the couple that we sent to Joe. They represent a marine creature, a huge marine creature, and the biggest land-dwelling dinosaur, basically, that's known in the history of the planet, a titanosaur and a plesiosaur-like creature buried side by side. And so we're looking at a flood deposit, even right on the edge of Queensland and the Northern Territory. And we went there and we got it. So thank you to those who support us. It is expensive, but the results are unbelievable. You basically bomb out any criticism, correct, Diane? That is criticism from what is the perspective of the God Made the Dinosaurs people, the Faraday Institute today.
Well, there's certainly nothing clever about evolutionary processes, because if you look at what the evolutionary processes are, natural selection, right from starting with Charles Darwin. Now, selection just means to choose between pre-existing options. So you can't actually make anything new using natural selection. So even Darwin's book cover, his title, is a piece of poor English. But people ran with it because they were looking for an excuse to turn aside from God. And Lyell was one of Charles Darwin's mentor. And of course, we know what his motives were because he expressed them himself. And so you have natural selection. That's not going to make anything. All that will happen is that some things are selected to survive and some things are selected to die. Well, that's not very clever. And it's also rather an insult to God, because that's not very nice either. God said that when he made everything, that was very good. So already you've got death. Yeah. Now, the other evolutionary process that Charles Darwin didn't know about was mutations. Now, we know a lot about mutations. We've had a century or so to discover them. Those are changes in genes, but all of the changes that we observe are either sort of neutral variations, but most of them actually damage genes, knock them out, make them stop working. So that's not going to make anything new. That's just going to make things worse. Things will go downhill, they will lose functions, or they will die out. So clever evolutionary processes, definitely not. There aren't any clever evolutionary processes, and you certainly cannot ascribe them to God, because when he finished the world, it was very good.
Craig,
it's an oxymoron.
Yeah, it is an oxymoron. That's a word I took out of your mouth. You've got the word truth on your T-shirt, and you run the Tasmanian Museum. Now, do you have many people come to that museum who have such theistic evolution or evolution is intelligent ideas when they arrive? And what effect does it have when they actually see what the real evidence is?
Yeah, well, we've had one chap comes to mind immediately who very much was a theistic evolutionist. And he spent a couple of hours in the museum. He read everything. He watched every film that we have playing in there. And his comment to the volunteers there was, the Creation Discovery Centre has changed my life. And he's now a believer in biblical creation as we understand it, the young Earth model. And when he saw the evidence and when he saw the facts presented and spent a bit of time studying it, he realised that the Bible is true from the beginning.
Okay, there's two things I want to comment on. Craig, tell them where your museum is, because at the moment, the airfares are being cheaper for the next 4 days. Those who are going to travel in Australia, get online now and get your cheap airfares and go to Tasmania, because where could they go to see your museum?
Yeah, a bit of shameless advertising never hurts. We are in the north part of Tasmania. The best airport to fly into is Launceston. That's close to us, about an hour's drive from us, and plenty of places to stay locally. Come and visit us, and come and see our seahorse farm as well. And
Craig, the second one is you mentioned this guy who came in with very fixed evolutionary views, and you couldn't get a better presentation of God using evolution than this book, applying it to dinosaurs. But you will have noticed, and I hope our listeners noticed, that the guy thought the evolutionary he believed had been based on facts. And the one thing your museum does is present the actual facts, and they have no choice but to confront their false conclusion. Evolution is not based on any facts. So hint, hint, wink, wink, Faraday Institute, you've got your facts wrong. You've got your faith in falsehoods, right? I can't stress that enough, because that's where I was once. I thought my professor told me the truth. I discovered ages later he was just giving me the latest popular opinion. And I discovered that when they changed the whole framework of how they thought about some of the fossils I was studying. They just changed the whole big story and told us a new one. From Wednesday through to Thursday, the whole world changed. And I realized they were not talking evidence at all. Joseph, take it from there.
Yeah, great stuff. Right, so onto the first official page, which is, of course, the title page. I'm already spotting some evidence that evolution isn't true, even on the title page. Can you see, Diane, the leaves depicted on the right-hand side?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ginkgo trees.
So
yes,
ginkgo trees are
living fossils. We had some on display at our open day at the museum. We have ginkgo trees growing here in Australia, and we have ginkgo fossils, classic living fossils.
And of course, their main point is that for as long as these plants have been around, they've been doing what God told them to do, which is reproduce after their own kind, which is exactly what they've done. They haven't evolved. They haven't changed in the slightest. So even on the first page, you have evidence that what they're promoting isn't true. In fact, that almost looks like a tree fern behind there as well. And that's another classic living fossil as well.
Yes.
We even had ginkgo fossils in Tasmania. I was given one the other day.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, if you go online, Joe, we actually did a research project on ginkgo fossils because I think we have the biggest collection of ginkgos in Australia, and the fossils go anywhere from almost sort of 20 to 36 divisions, and as time comes down, they get fewer and fewer until we now only have ginkgo biloba. It's got a split up the middle, and it's split into simply two lobes, which is where it gets its name from, ginkgo biloba, or two lobes. And the evidence shows they used to be up to 18 inches long. Now they're smaller than the end of your thumbnail in many cases. Degeneration for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, we need to go through this again. We're trying to see which God they're talking about, who made the dinosaurs. And so it starts off by saying God's world has changed a lot during its long history. Continents have crashed together and split apart. Oceans have opened and closed. There have been millions and millions of different kinds of plants and animals. Interesting use of the word kind there, and maybe we'll come on that in a moment. Back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, the seas were full of great toothed reptiles, chasing heavily armored fish, and the skies hosted huge flying reptiles soaring like dragons amongst the clouds. But the land was ruled by dinosaurs, all different kinds, including the largest creature ever to walk the earth. These fascinating creatures, it says in the bottom part down here, were each crafted by God through the amazing processes he uses to create the universe. They lived long, long ago, but their fossils, remains preserved in rocks, tell us a lot about what the world was like before humans existed. More than that, they tell us about God's power, love, patience, and great imagination. By exploring the natural world, we can learn about the awe-inspiring God who made it all. Okay. First and foremost, guys, maybe Craig would like to, or Diane would like to comment. We're talking here about the Earth changing a lot through its long history. Continents have clashed together and split apart. Oceans have opened and closed. We really seem to be going back to that principle of uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past, that there hasn't been, any change. It's been normal standard procedures that has produced everything. And this is what the process they're arguing that God is using. It's this anti-biblical concept at its core.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
I guess
Go for it, Dan.
Go,
Craig, you take it.
Craig?
Okay, yeah. Oh, look, I was just going to say we're focusing on the flood at our museum, and it was the evidence of the flood that this chap was really studying when he realised that the Bible can be trusted, and the global catastrophe of the flood is what really changes the science. And when people can realise that the world that once was different to the world that is now, then they can wake up to the fact that the Bible, as stated, is true from the beginning. So we focus on the flood because we've got limited space. Our museum's not huge, and we chose that because it's a key turning point in the whole thing, and it destroys uniformitarianism. There's no doubt about
Craig,
it.
I find it interesting that in the history of geology, the first major attack was not on creation. It was not on the 6 days. It was not on the Tower of Babel. It was on Noah's flood, right? And they set out to remove Noah's flood, and Lyell and cohorts actually succeeded in making even the church leaders doubt, number one, the universality of the flood. Number two, there was a God who could actually manipulate the world to make such a flood. And once that had become commonly accepted amongst the academic pastorates, particularly in England, the rest just began to tumble down like a house of cards. The last thing they demolished was creation. So those of you creationists out there, if you're trying to re-establish creation, you will not do it without reference, first of all, to the flood, because that's where the trouble began. The assumptions, the presuppositions that went with destroying people's confidence in the flood, because there is a God who's powerful enough to judge. There is a God who's powerful enough to actually destroy the world that he alone made in 6 days. It gives you a natural progression. Diane?
Yes, and the other thing, they mentioned change. Yes, there has been a lot of change in the history of the world, but not all change is evolution. Now, this is a piece of linguistic trickery that's used a lot. They describe some sort of change and make all changes equal evolution. Therefore, if you find evidence of change, they claim you found evidence of evolution. So it's important to understand the difference between change and evolution. Yes, there has been lots of change, but things can change and go downhill. They can lose features, they can die out. None of that is evolution. And there's certainly a trend in biology these days to call every biological process an evolutionary process, whether it involves a lot of change or a little bit of change. So be careful with the language there. Just because something has changed does not mean it has evolved. If anything, it means that it's probably gone downhill or it's lost some features. That's change, but not evolution.
What's even more important is when the question about which God are we talking about, you really have to raise this with the people who run the Faraday Institute, because Romans says God has stamped his nature on creation. And in a world that's particularly susceptible to moral changes, to the gay issue, to the transgender stuff, etc., you will find that you can justify that even as a so-called religious person if your God's nature is one of change. but the God who made creation actually put his nature on even the kinds that they'd produce their own kind, and they would actually multiply and fill the earth. And you can actually tell that they produce their own kind because he doesn't change. In fact, for those of you who are Christians and evangelicals, remember the first principle God put on the planet: multiply and fill the earth. And the Christians are supposed to reproduce after their kind too. So get out there and do it, and stop this nonsense with the Faraday Institutes. God used evolution because that would make an ever-changing God who may have opposed homosexuality 100 years ago, but he doesn't now.
Okay, let's move on to the next page. Dinosaurs in the Bible. Now, this is where we start to get into some of the more, shall we say, heretical side of things. Starts off by saying the Bible teaches that God made and still looks after everything in the entire universe. Excellent, I agree. All sorts of interesting things we know about from science, from the Big Bang to koalas and kangaroos, don't get a mention. Neither do dinosaurs, other than birds. So that's because the Bible wasn't written to be a science textbook or a list of things that God made. What's the Bible for? The people who wrote the different parts of the Bible talked in many ways about God as the creator of the universe, but they focused on talking about why he created everything rather than how he created. The Bible can help us to explore our really big questions about who God is, who we are in our place, meaning and purpose in this incredible universe. Okay, 2 quick points. Number one, they still don't answer the question, what's the Bible for? So let's turn to the Bible and see what it says itself about what it is for. Obviously, famous verse, probably everybody watching knows where I'm going with this. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete and thoroughly equipped for every good work. That's what the Bible is for. So it's for doctrine. It's for helping us understand what we need to believe, what we should be believing. It's for reproof. It's for helping us to tell us off, basically, for believing stuff that is wrong, for correcting us, getting us back on the path, and to instruct us in the way that we should actually go. That's what scripture is for. So it needs to be true. It needs to be God-breathed. It is God-breathed. It's true from the very beginning. So first of all, they don't actually answer the question, what is the Bible for? But secondly, do you notice what they say here, right? They say right here, people who wrote the different parts of the Bible talked in many ways about God as the creator of the universe, but they focused on talking about why he created rather than how he created. Now, I know this is something we've spoken about before, John, but the detail that scripture gives us in Genesis chapter 1 about how God created, that could have only come about by revelation from God, because nobody was there to see it, to describe it, to watch it. So the very details of how God created had to have come from God in the first place.
And in reality, the thing that becomes very evident when I first had to deal with this criticism, because you'll see in some of our debates, Sam, if you put up a reference to the streaming debate with Professor Polkinghorne, he was England's leading theistic evolutionist till his death. I'm sure he's absolutely changed his mind now, having had to stand face to face to Christ the Creator. But more of that later. You will find their attitude was the Bible is about why God created. Now, if you read through Genesis chapter 1, you'll find really only one reference to why God created, and that's to the sun, moon, and the stars for signs and times and seasons. And of course, Christmas is coming up, a good season to remember that stars were used as a sign to announce the birth of the Savior. So that's why it started in chapter 1, which is all about the Christ who created, as you find a little bit later. But as you read through it over and over again, it does tell you how God created, because it says, and God said. And our biggest problem is I can't even get the dog to take notice of me, let alone make a plant by saying anything. Right? So you'll find that our biggest problem is that we like to be God, and we're not. And what we find is that when you look at Genesis, our problem with understanding the mechanism is 10 times or so. It said, and God said, right? and then the earth brought forth. God spoke and it happened. God's idea was put into verbal form, really, and it resulted in an action. So over and over again, we are told what God can do with his word. His word is power. So you need God to speak into your life if you want to exhibit his power and see what he actually can do. So don't hold back. God is the word. Get it into you, read it, what it says, and believe it, because sadly, we have to say the Faraday Institute shows every sign of not believing what it's saying. Their Jesus will be really weak.
I think this whole thing about Genesis being used by theistic evolutionists and being described as giving us the why and not the how is just an excuse to deflect away from the how, because I don't see in Genesis the answer to the question, why did God do it? There's perhaps answers in other parts of the Bible for that, to declare the glories of God, and it was made through Jesus and for Jesus, as Colossians tells us. So we have some answers as to why in other parts of the scriptures, but I don't see those answers in Genesis itself.
No.
No,
Good, very good point. All right, on to the next page then, when we're starting to get into the early life on Earth, the evolutionary story. Now, notice that, we can't take Genesis as real history. We can't take Genesis literally, okay? Even though this is a statement from God, even though this has to be a revelation of God, because nobody else was there to witness it, right? But we can't take it as accurate according to the Faraday Institute. But what about this for an emphatic statement? Planet Earth was formed about 4.6 billion years ago from space rocks crashing and squishing together as they zoomed around the sun. Scientists think that there's been life on Earth for about 3.6 billion years. At first, all living things were tiny single-celled organisms, a bit like bacteria, but gradually an astonishing variety of life has developed, from huge, noisy or colorful things to tiny, silent and almost see-through ones. What an imaginative creation. They've even highlighted creation, right? It's almost the audacity you can see from. We can't trust the revealed word of God. We can't trust true revelation from God, but we emphatically know that the earth was formed 4.6 billion years ago. And I think we pointed out last week, John, that you've previously mentioned John Polkinghorne. One of the ways that you caught him out was the fact that this is a constantly, for want of a better word, evolving thinking about the age of the earth and how old it is. It constantly changes, and yet we can emphatically state here the earth was formed here, this did happen, it did evolve, and yet we can't take the word of God who actually revealed to us how he did it, specifically how he did it in great detail. So it's pretty
Well, history proves that they've just dated their book, because that time will change sometime down the track.
Yeah. It says,
Yes,
goes on to say,
in my lifetime.
yeah. It goes on to say evolution means change over time. Lots of people, including the famous Charles Darwin, have made discoveries that help us think about how things have gradually become more and more varied. The theory of evolution is how we refer to our best current scientific ideas about this exciting process. Now, I'm going to read you the next bit, and maybe this is a bit for Diane to comment on, and Craig, as both from sort of biological backgrounds, right? Look at the mistake that the Faraday Institute is making here, particularly the same mistake that Charles Darwin made, all right? Look at what it says when it talks about small changes. It says change over time happens because every living thing is like its parents, but also a little bit different from them. Sometimes small changes that make a creature different from its parents can be useful. They might help the creature get more food, hide from predators, or look more attractive to creatures of the same species. If they help the creature to have more babies, then these changes are likely to be passed on to the next generation. Over many generations, lots of little changes add up to big size differences, resulting in more and more new shapes, sizes, colors, and eventually new species. Diane and Craig, maybe you'd like to comment on, I mean, they make a jump. Can you see where they make a jump from something which we've observed, something that we've seen happen, to something that goes to hang on a minute, over many generations, lots of little changes will add up to big differences. Now, I noticed there's many generations here. Have we got any examples, Diana and Craig, of animals that we've done experiments on that breed really quickly? So we have examples of lots and lots and lots of generations, many, many, many generations. Do we see any examples of this process actually happening?
Well, no, we don't, because the small changes are mutations, and no one's ever found any good mutations. There might be neutral variations, but mutations are universally bad. I mean, that's why we try to avoid them. A lot of medical science is aimed at avoiding mutations and also trying to reverse the effects of mutations. So small changes by mutations will not produce evolution. Now, small changes will occur. We've observed them, and that's what happens when you get domestic breeding. Charles Darwin did this. He did it with pigeons. He bred all sorts of different pigeons, and you can get bigger ones and smaller ones and more colorful ones and more fluffy ones. And this happens with domestic dog breeds, with agricultural breeds as well. And all you end up with is a lot of variation. You do not end up with one kind changing into another. So you can breed sort of bigger dogs, smaller dogs, but you won't change dogs into a cat. And the other way around, you can breed sort of fluffy cats and hairless cats and cats without tails and big cats and little cats, but you won't turn them into a dog or into any other creature. So yes, you can get a lot of small changes, you can get a lot of variations, but no one has actually observed, and this is important, because if they're claiming that this is a scientific fact, then it should have been observed, and it hasn't. Variation, yes, but change from one kind into another through that variation, no, we've not observed that at all. And again, we've got the problem of lots of things change, but they don't evolve. You need to discern between what's change and what's evolution. All changes are not evolution.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, yeah, you're right. I was just going to say, when I visited the Museum of Victoria, they talked about mutations, and they clearly state that mutations are mistakes. So when we're saying, when this book is saying that evolution is a very clever process, well, they're putting God down to a process of mistakes, where his word is clear. He's not a God of mistakes. He's a God of perfection. In all his ways, perfect and just. So this is an absolute misrepresentation of the process that God used in creation.
It sadly reminds me of the fact that Jesus Christ, who is the creator, and all things were made by him and for him, is the New Testament teaching that every Christian should be pleased to stand under that banner, is the same one who warned us that his power to create a universe is matched by his power to judge and destroy that universe on Judgment Day, to burn up everything, make new planet, make a new heavens and a new earth. But as part of that process, he warns men and women about a judgment, particularly of what we use our mouths for. So he actually reminds us that on Judgment Day, there will be many who stand before him and say, Lord, we did this, we did that in your name. Wasn't it wonderful? We wrote this book with the Faraday Institute about you creating everything. And God will say, get out of here. I never knew you, because you lied on every page about me. You lied about the evidence. And this is the same Jesus who says there will be no liars in the new heavens and the new earth. He's specific. He actually mentions liars by name. So can I urge you, those who hold this position, and it's one reason why I changed. You see, my professor wanted me to adopt theistic evolution, and I had to reach the conclusion, this is not what the book actually says. Of course, if I wanted to please the professor and get 7 PhDs in a row, then I could have just bowed the knee and joined the long line of theistic evolutionists, which sadly many of the church people did. But if you want to actually get commendation with a much better PhD from higher above, then don't do that. follow what Jesus says and what Jesus alone says in his word.
And I think just off the back of that, John, it's worth pointing out down the bottom here, they say, so how did God make the dinosaurs? Many Christians think God created every single weird and wonderful living thing through the process of evolution. That includes the dinosaurs. And I have to be extremely grateful that Christianity is not a, as you've put it, democratically elected set of truths. Right? It makes absolutely no difference what Christians think God did. It makes no difference about how Christians think God created. The only thing that matters is how God revealed to us what he did. How did he create? What did he create us in the image of? Who are we currently made in the image of? And why do we need a savior? And who is our savior? Right? So you break it down. God created the world in 6 days. We were created in originally the perfect image of God, Adam and Eve. But now there's nobody on planet Earth who's made in the perfect image of God, because we're all made in the fallen images of our Father. That's why we need a savior. That's where you can trace back the origin of sin, the origin of death to. It's back there in Genesis when Adam chose to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's why we need one who was perfect to save us. That's why only the Word, Jesus Christ, who created things in the beginning, becoming flesh and dying on a cross, could actually take the penalty for our sins. And you see how everything is so intertwined into that gospel message. So I've got to be blunt. I really couldn't give a toss what Christians believe, right? What really matters is what God says and what God's word has actually revealed to us. That's what we need to be focusing on. That's what we need to be looking at and actually understanding God's own revelation to us. So let's move on to the next page, because we're going to spend a long time on here, I can already tell.
This may end up being a 2-parter.
I know, we're already going on. We should have started earlier. Never mind.
Joe,
I really do think this is...
Can I save you some time, Joe?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe it's just an opportunity for a sales commercial. Sam, if you can put up where we stream these 3 DVDs on dinosaurs, which
Hold them up
deal
again, John.
with
Hold them up
the
again,
issue
John.
Joe's just about to tell. Dinosaurs Down Under, Jurassic Ark, Dinosaurs Down Under, Thorny Issues, and Dinosaurs Down Under, The Flood. You will find those fabulous teaching, because they do go on quite a while, but they start here and they move outwards, and they deal with this issue that Joe's just about to get buried under because of the millions of years of time and fossils he's going to talk about. So back to you, Joe.
Yeah, well, I just want to bring out, before we even get into all this, okay, cake layers, rock layers, how fossils are made, do you know just the Bible verse they're quoting at from down here? He, that's Jesus, existed before anything else, and he holds all things together. Now, John, it's a great Bible verse, by the way, but I'd have thought in a book called God Made the Dinosaurs that the verse before would have been more applicable. What's that telling us?
To be honest, at having been up for 4 hours, I can't for the life of me think. You better remind me, Joe.
Colossians 1:16 says, all things were made by Christ and for Christ. And then in verse 17, it says, he was exalted before anything else, and he holds all things together. So it's the verse. I just really thought it's kind of ironic how they'll put this bit in, right? That Jesus existing before anything else and holding creation together. But they still haven't, as of yet, told us which God they're talking about, who created all things, even though the Bible verse before this one actually tells you explicitly that it's Jesus Christ who is the creator. By him all things were made, everything in heaven and earth. By him all creatures, all things were made. By him the dinosaurs were made. It's all things were made by him, and all things were made for him. Okay, let's have a look at what it says here. All over the world, scientists called paleontologists dig up fossils and study them. Their discoveries show us lots of exciting things about the dinosaurs God has made, and we're always finding out more. Great stuff. Deep down inside planet Earth, it is hot and squishy, but the Earth's surface is made of layers of rock arranged like the layers of a giant cake. The rock record tells us about Earth's history. Each time period represented in the rocks have been given a name. Most of God's dinosaurs lived in a long time period called the Mesozoic era, which can be divided into 3 shorter periods. The oldest is Triassic, and Jurassic, and Cretaceous, ending 66 million years ago. You might not be able to imagine that far back, but God was there enjoying his dinosaurs roaming through the Mesozoic era. Now, without going into a 10-hour discussion on rock layers and stuff, John, just remind us how people can find out more details about some of our strata experiments and things that we've been doing, about how in reality this is not a record of history of life on Earth first and foremost. It's a record of death, but also rock layers don't form from bottom to top.
Two ways. One, if you go to creationresearch.net, click on latest experiments, you will see our now famous or notorious, depending on your position, a strata machine showing you how rock layers form from left to right. And as I've shared before, when we did a specific program on this, I got that idea because my professor, my millions of years professor, my world famous professor, the guy in charge of the department said, "Oh, sorry chaps, the Grand Canyon layers get old sideways." And I thought, that's weird. But having been there myself many times, he's absolutely right. The rocks do not age from bottom to top anywhere near as significantly as they age from the area they're coming in from to the area they're heading to. They age sideways. So that's available on our website under Creation Research, latest experiments. And also you'll be able to find several programs on our YouTube here. I'm sure Sam can have the links up that we actually did these and spelled them out. And we did a fuller length one on S standing for truth. And that's available as well. If you want to link that up, Sam, they have got some good programs of ours where we spell this out and take you to undeniable evidence that that sort of geologic column, as I said earlier, is one of the first reconstructionist histories that we have to deal with. And yet this book treats it as a fact. Most of the Christians treat it as a fact. Even those who want to have a young earth are treating it as a fact, and they need to come face to face with the fact that it was set up largely on the basis of false presuppositions, sadly from a Christian guy called Steno, but nevertheless he got it wrong. And secondly, it's been used by people like Lyell and Darwin to actually sell us on the idea of millions of years and the Bible being false. It is not a neutral picture of geology, it's a fake reconstruction of history.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Okay, moving on. How fossils are made. Fossils are the remains or traces of creatures and plants that have turned to stone over thousands or millions of years. They can be found all over God's world. Now, number one, I take issue with all fossils being turned to stone, because we know that that's not entirely true. There are multiple ways of creating a fossil. A good number of them, like the dinosaur bones, the very creatures that we're talking about in this book, most of their fossils haven't turned to stone. They've been preserved in stone. They've been permineralized, which is, of course, something completely different. It's still entrapped and encased and permeated with bones. There we are, John, like one of your ones. Great big dinosaur bone there.
What you'll find is this actually is the bone. Right? This is the real dinosaur. And when you open up these bone cells, if you want to call them that, I'll get Diane to comment in a moment, you'll find that they actually still are the bone, and they're heavy because the minerals have come in the water and filled up any spaces. Now, Diane, because most people think bones are solid, they don't do anything, they're actually living, and we need to understand how their structure is. So explain why I know this is bone and what all this, take it so you can actually see into the cellular structure there. Diane, take it away.
Well, yeah, bone is actually a very dynamic tissue when it's alive. Those things there, those holes there aren't actually individual living cells, but bone has a sort of spongy texture to it, so it's got soft tissue in those spaces. But even the hard bone itself, like what's called the compact bone, that's the bone that appears to be completely just solid with no holes in it, that goes around the outside of bones and forms the sort of tubular steel type structure that you have in your long bones. Even that has cavities in it. Now those are cellular size, in other words they are microscopic. So if you get a piece of that bone and look at it under a microscope, it has lots of tiny little cavities in it, which are only the size of a cell, so really microscopic. And those cavities are actually linked up together. So there is a very, very fine microscopic set of channels that goes all through that. So if you have a bone that's buried in earth where there's water flowing through it, water with contained minerals will flow through that and flow through those microscopic channels and leave behind deposits of minerals. Now, we've actually seen that happen at Jurassic Ark when we deliberately buried some bones, and sure enough, they became permineralized. So it's not a slow process. It's actually quite a rapid process. And we've written about it in our new book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes, if you want to see that here in Australia, it's not in England yet, but go online to our Creation Research shop. Sam will put the address up, and order the new version of Tights, Mites and Fossil Fights, where we actually took the bone, we buried it, right? We kept track of it. We tied it to the ground so we couldn't lose it, put a label on it, and came back when it was absolutely jet black. And, of course, you think, oh, it's just plant material. It's just debris. It's just fungus growing on the outside. But, Diane, what was your job in that experiment?
Well, we actually ground some of it up.
I was the brains, she was the brawn. She did her cooking trick and ground it all up like you do with herbs. And then we tested it, didn't we?
And we tested it for iron. We took some advice from the various chemists that we know, and we did a couple of simple tests for iron. Actually, one of the most simple tests you can do for iron is to actually make a cup of tea and put it. Well, you know, the brown stain that you get in a cup that's had tea in it, that's a good test for whether there's iron in the water that you've made it with. But one of our chemists told us a more sophisticated test, but which we could still do at home. So yes, we have got iron in the bones.
And because we know the date we put it in, the date we took it out, we knew exactly that the iron started within a couple of months, and by the time we took it out, it was actually strikingly rich with iron. So what Joseph says is true, and the Faraday Institute is ignoring the evidence, or they're ignorant of it. Sadly, I have to say, in many cases, they are ignorant of it. Joe?
Yeah, okay. So the other thing that I wanted to pull out from that is that these have turned to stone, which we've just dealt with, but they've become fossils over thousands or millions of years. And again, you've got another contradiction, because they then go on to say that most fossils form when a creature dies and is buried quickly in a landslide, a flood, or the bottom of the lake. So you've instantly got this continual, oh, it must take millions of years, it must take thousands of years, it must take enormous periods of time, yet no, they have to be buried quickly, otherwise they just get destroyed. And then they go on and talk about how all the soft stuff rots away and only the hard parts remain. And then they go on to say that soft stuff can be preserved. So they're really almost contradictory in just a single paragraph of text over how these fossils form. But to just break it down, everything we know about fossils tells us that they have to be buried quickly, deeply, without oxygen, right? The majority of them have evidence of being buried in a flooding environment, because you have land dinosaurs buried with fish and, you know, entire log jams that have been swept into position or buried in marine sediment. So definitely indicative of a flood. And we find plenty of soft stuff, whether it be skin, whether it be scales, whether it be parts of the mummified creature, so gut content and stuff like that. Coprolite, which is fossil dinosaur poo, that is very common, and of course that's soft, squidgy stuff that gets preserved. And they do have one very brief mention just over here of, here it is, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, and it talks about how she's found some of the original remains that have been preserved inside the rock. And of course that, we'll discuss that a little bit later, so we can talk about that when we come to that. But it's just amazing how contradictory they are just in a single paragraph. Okay, let's move on to the next page. Dinosaur Isle. Dinosaur fossils are found all over the world, even in Antarctica. But some places, oh, that's interesting, climate change reference there. But some places, such as Scotland's Isle of Skye, sometimes called Dinosaur Isle, I thought that was the Isle of Wight that was called that, but there we go, seem to have been particularly good for making fossils. In the Mesozoic times, the island had warm, shallow seas, lagoons, steamy fern forests. Many dinosaurs left behind traces like long lines of footprints and trackways in the mud, and these very slowly turned to stone. The traces give us hints about the lives of God's dinosaurs, including some of the biggest ever to walk on Earth. Of course, dinosaur trackways being preserved slowly. I mean, I don't know when the last time any of us have visited the beach, but you'd be hard pushed to find your footprints the next day because they don't get preserved slowly. Anyway, they'd have to be buried quickly in a, the sediment's got to come and fill it up very quickly. Okay, they talk about a couple of scientists here. Texas trackways for sauropods. Again, you're dealing with evidence that these things were buried very, very quickly, for sure. People have been uncovering clues about God's dinosaurs for a very long time. Often they simply found them by simply being curious about the world. It talks about Mary Ann Mantell. Now, Mantell, John, credited with, at least Mary Ann, or there was discussion over whether it was her or whether it was Gideon Mantell who kind of found them, and but it was certainly Richard Owen who started to describe these things. So what do we know about him?
Okay, we know about the Mantells that he was a medical doctor, and it's his wife who needs to be credited with the first iguanodont tooth, right? Or iguana, the big dinosaur, and she showed him, the doctor, and he was fascinated by this. He said, that's a tooth from a lizard, and it's a bigger lizard than anything we've ever seen. Now, probably fortunately for science, Gideon Mantell got so obsessed with digging up dinosaur remains, particularly on the Isle of Wight, that he went bankrupt as a doctor. He couldn't find any income. And those of us who dig up bones often know you put a lot more money and time into it than you'll ever potentially get out of it, unless you're going to sell a T-Rex for $3 million or whatever. You will find that his collection ended up with Richard Owen, who we know was a creationist, right? And who we know was sure that God created the great monsters. And so the first dinosaurs were ended up in Richard Owen's collection, and he basically invented the word dinosaur. The saurus was an old word, as in archaeosaur, crocodiles and things like that. Saurus, as in the letter S, right? Because these creatures, the archaeotypes, are the ones that have an S shape in their body. And he was sure, as a creationist, that these fitted somewhere in God's creation. He didn't know much about them because we had a total of 4 specimens. So don't be too harsh on him, right? And not all of them were complete specimens. So he did his best, but he was the guy who was really the world's fossil expert, and his influence was unbelievable. He had a photographic memory, and this is in the days before you could Google anything. If you sent him even a fragment of a bone, almost instantly he'd say, that's from us. In fact, when they sent him the bones of some of our giant creatures out here, he was the first to recognize the New Zealand moa, the giant sort of emu-like bird that they used to have there. And he said, that's from a non-living, extinct giant bird. And he was absolutely right. And in fact, the name has his family name after it as a key identifier. It was identified by Owen. And that's how you do classification, of course. But that's how good he was, but he saw it all in the firm creation framework.
Yeah, great point. Good stuff. It also mentions a little bit here, maybe Diane, or because I've looked into this a little bit, but it's interesting what they say. It talks about the ideas of dinosaurs being hot or cold-blooded. It says birds and mammals like us are different than the reptiles. We're warm-blooded, which means our bodies, of course, make our own heat. Because dinosaurs were thought to be like lizards, people thought they were also cold-blooded. Since working out that birds are living dinosaurs, scientists now think that dinosaurs were warm-blooded like us. Of course, we could go on to talk about birds and dinosaurs, but I think that's coming on later on in the book. Any evidence now that we're finding soft, squidgy stuff inside dinosaur bones, Diane? Any evidence that they were warm-blooded? As far as I'm aware, there's still no evidence from their blood vessels or from their cells or anything that we're finding inside of them that they were warm-blooded, as far as I can find anyway. But I'll hand over to you to comment. But as far as I can find, the only real reason that some scientists are suggesting that they might be warm-blooded is to try and have one closer link between dinosaurs and birds. I've just noticed we've gone completely out of focus.
Yes. There's an ongoing debate in the professional literature about whether they were warm-blooded or cold-blooded. There is a suggestion that maybe because of their sheer bulk, they could maintain their internal body temperature better than some of the smaller reptiles. As mentioned in the book there, dinosaurs are found in polar regions, so Antarctica and in the high Arctic. So people have suggested, well, maybe they were sufficiently warm-blooded to maintain their internal temperature, but that's not really evidence from the creatures themselves. That's just an idea that maybe explains something that they that they don't understand. There's another reason that there might be dinosaurs in the Antarctic and in the polar regions is that there was a worldwide flood and the dinosaurs got washed away all around the world, but they don't want to know about that. No. So yes, this is an ongoing debate, but there is no definitive evidence that dinosaurs were warm-blooded. They were. The indications are that they had a reptilian sort of physiology, so they were ectothermic, meaning that they gained a lot of their heat from outside rather than from generating it from within like a bird or a mammal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It goes on to talk about reconstructing dinosaur skeletons. Quite a lot of it is fairly reasonable. Right? It talks about how you see evidence of diseased and cracked and damaged ribs. So again, we're not dealing. I mean, you've got to remember this is supposedly from the period of evolution before God declared everything very good, and yet, Diane, we know from the fossil record, in fact, some of the bones, your marsupial bones we were looking at the other day, it was evidence that they are diseased, they are cracked, they've regrown, there's issues here. None of this really fits into a very good world in the slightest. Of course, the little bit of imagination that they have to add into is, it says down here with the skin, very little Allosaurus skin has been found, that's fine. So we don't know what Al's skin was like, but some other fossils might give us clues. Dinosaurs seem to have different colors and patterns. We found dinosaur skin showing wrinkles, feathers, and scales, arranged in striped circles or spots. So the skin may have been smooth, bumpy, covered in scales, or even feathers. And we briefly dealt with feathers earlier, but we can come on to it, and there's just not really any evidence of it.
Well, bumps and colours, that's no problem because living reptiles have bumpy skin and colourful skin. So yes, that's not a problem at all. As to whether you classify some of these filaments on their skin as feathers is another thing, that they do not have the structure of feathers. When we find fully formed feathers, if they are attached to a creature, it's obviously not a dinosaur. But most of them, dinosaurs, when they find real dinosaur skin, it has a reptilian structure. And yes, it may have sort of various excrescences and decorations, but that's not surprising as living reptiles have those.
Now, the first dinosaur skin I ever saw was on a dinosaur dig in Alberta many, many years ago. It was stuck in the ground and it had no trace of anything you could, even with the best imagination, describe as feathers. Now, of course, the idea of feathers on dinosaurs was not even popular then. They were regarded as so reptilian they only had scales. Now, the world has evolved in its mentality, so now dinosaurs with feathers are the in thing, and you can even imagine them in the absence of evidence, because there is none, right? There's absolutely no evidence they ever had feathers at all. And Joe, you've got plenty of fossil feathers. Do they have any resemblance to what we actually see on dinosaur skin?
Nothing in the slightest. I mean, every single example of a fossil feather that we find, it is clearly a fossil feather, right? Whether it's a downy feather, whether it's a solid barbuled feather, they're feathers, and abundantly and clearly so. Every fossil on a feather on or purported fossil feather on a dinosaur tends to be indistinct, tends to be very decayed. It could easily be decayed collagen strands or anything like that, right? Keratin strands, something that we know happens to keratin when it's submerged in water. Right? I mean, just think about your toenails or your fingers after they've been in water for a long while. So there really isn't any evidence from what I've seen of dinosaurs having feathers. Certainly not a feather as we would recognize a feather. And you've also got to point out the fact that, go ahead, John, sorry.
Yeah, Joe, having been out collecting rocks that do have feathers in them, right, and they have purchased some as well as gone and dug them, the fossils that I've found look just like the fossils of feathers in your collection, look just like the fossil, just like present day chicken feathers or whatever. There is no difference. The technology of feathers is absolutely radical with their little hooks where they actually can be like an umbrella, they can hook together and make air move. Whereas the little filaments that you sometimes see that are decayed dinosaur skin have no structure like a feather at all. So again, I'd encourage you, those of you who are into creation, who are part of creation groups, go and do your own digging. You'll soon find reasons to share with the Faraday Institute, sorry guys, you are wrong. Here's my dinosaur skin. Here's my fossil feather. Can you actually see that you are not telling us the truth? Now, Joe, as I've texted you, I've got to go shortly because, as many of the viewers know, my wife's not 100%. So I'm going to sneak in a commercial, something that's coming up that's only just been organised this week. On December the 21st, just before Christmas, our team will actually be doing a Standing for Truth special, and we'll be doing it on Christmas, a biblical approach to Christmas, right? Not just a creation versus evolution one, although because we are talking about the birth of the Creator, this will come up. But of course, he came for a particular reason, and you want a great night touring through the Bible, touring through all the things that he's done. Join us for December the 21st. I'm sure SFT will put it on their times, on their schedule, so will we. And just pray for us all. Craig down in Tasmania. Diane, you're going back to Canberra today?
Yes, I am.
You are. And in fact, just pray for her as she departs. She'd love to stay up here and do more digging and things like that. But I do need to go, Joe, and just check on where my wife is.
That's fine. Well, I think then we should start to, I mean, we're on page 18, right, of 64. So I think we ought to come back to this next week because there's so much that we can get out of this, right? We haven't even gotten to the bulk of the book yet. But I definitely think it's worth two parts. So let's come back to this and try and focus on it and get it finished next week because we get into some really interesting stuff, particularly based around the authority of Scripture, right, and about what the Faraday Institute believes about the Bible, and are they even promoting the same God that creation research is promoting? I mean, it's a serious question that needs to be asked, right? So I think we should come back to this next week and focus a little bit on that kind of stuff. Before we go, however, I hope you've enjoyed it and it's been food for thought, and it can give you a little bit of, ammunition, whatever you want to call it, a bit of understanding to, actually use resources like this, where you'll come up against them all the time, because this is effectively a secular book, more or less. So take secular books and give them the same kind of treatment that we're giving this book, right? Go through it step by step, ask, what does the Bible say? What of this is factual? What is it is evidential? What of it is just pure interpretation? And think through these things. But before we finish, Sam, over to you for a very brief little snippet update, and then we'll close off for the night.
All right, then. Okay, so just a little plug from me. Some of the resources that John mentioned earlier. We've got Dinosaurs Down Under Part 1, Dinosaurs Down Under Part 2, and Dinosaurs Down Under Part 3. Great resources. We've also got some kid-friendly resources for you. Dinosaurs, The Rest of the Tale. I remember watching this when I was a wee one. And Monsters God Made Jehovah's Park. Great resources there, as well as these, the Darwin on the Rocks trilogy. These are all really great.
And they can all be streamed, Sam?
Yes, they can if you go to creationresearchlive.com. We've also got this one. This is great for the kids. Lovely, beautiful, full color pictures. Shows you where dinosaur illustrations have been found all around the world, made by man. And also as well, for all the parents out there, if your kids are asking questions, you might want to get yourself one of these, your questions about creation answered. Also, again, whizzing through, we've got Adam and the Dinosaurs, Adam and Eve and the Monkeys in the Trees. We've got Who Made All the Dinosaurs? As was mentioned earlier, what happened to the dinosaurs? We've also got how did a baby elephant get such a long nose? There we go. How did Noah do it as well? And because it's coming up to Christmas, it's not Christmas without Starboy. Look at that. Beautiful, lovely, full-page comic. Brilliant. Right, okay. So thank you, everyone, for sticking around so far. I've got a very important announcement to make. So there's been a little bit of behind-the-scenes work been going on. As you all are probably very well aware about the Genesis project that we've got going on. That's trundling on nicely behind the scenes. But there's another project that we are embarking on that will probably be coming sooner than Genesis. And it's something we need your help with. As a lot of people may know, ministry donations around the Christmas time tends to stagnate a little bit, naturally because of Christmas and paying off credit cards and things like that. But we're embarking on a project which has been brought about because of my work, what I do for a day job. I work for a website company. And so what I can officially announce now is that we are building a brand new creationresearch.net website, as well as a Creation Research app. So there we go. The new Creation Research app and website coming to iOS and Android. The website will be available on all devices. However, we need your help. We need donations to get this done. This is not a cheap project. This costs a lot of money, but it's to get you the content that you need when you need it the most. So if you're round at a friend's house and they say, oh, well, evolution is true because of X, Y, Z, you can open up your Creation Research app. You can click on one of our documentaries and just via a Chromecast or an Apple TV or a Fire TV stick or whatever, you can just put it onto their television. You can watch it together and you can hopefully answer all the questions. Planning on having different tiers as well. So like a Netflix style subscription where you can get access to all of the documentaries or a selection of the documentaries. And we will also have free content on there as well. So you don't need to pay anything. So all the Creation Conversations will go on there. All of our YouTube content will go on there. And it's just a really great way of engaging with us. And also it'll have live streaming built into it. So you can actually watch Creation Conversations live on the app. Or if Joe goes live in Timbuktu or Isle of Wight or wherever he is, it's going to be really, really great. But we need your support. So please, can I implore you, if you have the spare money, please could you donate to help get this done quicker? This will be done eventually, but it's just a case of the quicker we can raise the funds, the quicker we can get this out to you guys. We're really passionate about the project, and we've had a lot of meetings behind the scenes. My boss has been great. He's been really supportive of Creation Research, which is a blessing. So we want to really sort of push this and get the word out about this as well to as many people as possible. So thank you to whoever is donating. Who has donated today. I know we have already got some donations I have yet to read out. I'll come off full screen.
Just to say quickly, Sam, just to give people a big perspective, this idea of an app is not just as a resource, but it's also there where we can have all of our content on it in terms of streaming rights. So people can subscribe to it. People can watch all of the content. It's much more easily accessible than DVDs and all that kind of stuff. So everything, it'll be a big media hub, but also it's going to facilitate the museum ministry. So we have museums in Australia, we have museums here in the UK, and you met Glenn last week, who is developing the museum over in the States. And of course, the idea is that we can use this app as a free means. You download it for free, you can carry on round, and you can actually use that app to get masses of content and information as you go around the museum. So that virtual reality stuff that Diane was pointing out and showing earlier, that can be part of it using the app, right? Having videos of us talking about the content or the pots or the fossils or the whatever. It's something that's going to really put us on the cutting edge of the creation world. So and to give you a perspective, we're not just thinking of this as some long distant term thing. Lord willing, if everything goes ahead, we are looking to have something done middle of next year. So we are actually getting on with this, so to speak. But like Sam said, we do need your help. We do need your support to try and actually get this put all together. But Sam, why don't we finish with some thank yous and then close down with the night?
Yes, exactly. So on the topic of donations, we have to give thanks to everyone who's donated. So Stacey H, God bless you. 999 US Buckaroos, God bless you and keep you all. No, God bless you, Stacey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Sandy C has come in with 20 New Zealand Buckaroos. Team CR fighting the good fight. Hallelujah. That was my audible version of an emoji. Thank you. I'm here constantly, all the time. I cease to leave. So, I probably won't be invited back if I carry on doing that. I think that is it. However, I know that someone did mention one thing to do with tracts. I know that, Joe, you made this. This has some sort of tracty things in it, but it might be worth exploring, creating some tracts to sell.
Yes, we are redoing that tract. We've had a lot of very good feedback from that particular tract. It was something that we kind of threw together very quickly because we needed it for an event we were doing. But we had one group at the event, a local creation group, who basically bought the lot off of us because they said it was the best track on creation that they've ever seen because it was focused on the gospel, which is good. It's what we should be about. So we're going to be redoing some of that and getting Craig involved as well with some of the testimonies from the museum. So yes, more stuff will be happening in the new year. Particularly pray for all of our supporters and our volunteers and workers who come and help us, because it frees up people like me and John and Diane and Craig to actually be able to produce this kind of content, right? When you're bogged down with administration, it does become a bore quite quickly, but a necessary one. So just pray that the volunteer teams, and if you want to volunteer, get in touch with your local office, because it really does mean that we can focus on what we need to get on with. But anyway, I think it's about time that we close down for the night. We will be back. Yes, thank you, Anne. You do donate this on any creation research website, just so you everybody gets a full idea. All of creation research supports each other. Right, so if you donate to the UK, it will go towards the work of creation research, the production of the app, the whole lot. If you donate in Australia, it does the same thing, right? In each place, we tend to have a charitable status. So we have the Creation Research Trust in the UK, so you can gift aid it, tax deductibility and all that. We have the same thing in the States. So find out the information about the local office to you, or direct it automatically to the Australian site, which I know there's a whole new way of donating in Australia at the moment. So do that. Next week, we'll be back on this, folks, carrying on with God Made the Dinosaurs. And we're getting towards Christmas, so I think our Christmas special will be coming up soon. And I know we've had loads and loads of questions through tonight, which we didn't get to, but just remember, we do keep a record of them all. So we'll probably fit a Q&A session in before Christmas as well. So do keep them coming. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. I think that went really well tonight. We had a great dig through the first 18 pages.
Dig through.
But nonetheless, some good content we covered there, and we'll carry on next week. So do make sure to catch us there. Goodbye. God bless. See you all later.
Bye.
See ya.
Okay.